Welcome back to the Mental Playbook Podcast. I'm here with Marc Sagal, a founder of the Winning Minds, working with Olympic athletes to professional athletes, and he carries a degree in sports psychology. So this will be really interesting because that's kind of what the Mental Playbook is all about. So your background consists of those fields in psychology, philosophy, and sports. What interested you in these fields, and more specifically, sports psychology?
Well, thanks for having me, first of all.
Yes, of course.
Um, so I wanted to be a pro soccer player my whole life. And I was, but I wasn't great. Um, and I always felt like my mind was getting in the way of my performance.
Mm.
And so when I learned about sports psychology, I thought, oh, cool, there's this field that helps people like myself. So that was the initial draw to it.
Yeah. And what first interested you in sports and specifically soccer?
Well, it's kind of a long story, but I actually grew up in Boston and I played hockey when I was young and I wasn't very good. And then we moved to New Mexico and I was kind of this hyperactive kid. And I think my mother was just like searching for sports that I would like gravitate towards.
Mhm.
And I think one day she like dropped me off at the soccer field. She goes, "All right, just try this thing." Um, and I don't know, I just loved it. Like as soon as I started, I loved it. Um, and I don't know what it was. I think it was like the expectation from the other sports that I had grown up with was that, really good eye-hand coordination. I don't know, like those were things that I wasn't like naturally strong at. And so like I felt like that I was reborn at this opportunity like to test out a new part of my body, which is kind of like how the feet work. And yeah, it just kind of grew from there.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you were the chief operating officer at Enhanced Performance Systems. Can you first share a little bit about what Enhanced Performance Systems is?
Yeah. Um, so it requires a little bit of history, but um, when I was studying sports psychology, the reason I got interested in it first and foremost was because of the work of a very famous sports psychologist. And the guy's name was Robert Nidifer. And it turns out that he was from San Diego, which is where I live now, where you are. Um, and his company was called Enhanced Performance Systems. And the first book that I read on sports psychology was written by Robert Nidifer. And I was in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is where I grew up. And I thought, okay, like this is the kind of guy that I want to work with and work for. And I was really fortunate enough that when I found my way to San Diego, I had him as a guest lecturer at university. And we got to know each other a little bit. And as I got to know him, we kind of hit it off. And I think he appreciated what I might be able to do to help his company. And after I graduated with my sports psych degree, he basically asked if I would come and work with him at his company, Enhanced Performance Systems. And that kind of grew into the chief operating officer role. So that's that.
Yeah, and what were some of the biggest lessons you learned from him or just working there that kind of goes with mental and physical performance?
Okay. So he was a pioneer in a very specific aspect of sports psychology, even though he was influential in a lot of different areas. But the thing that he's most famous for is his attentional model and the way that concentration affects performance. So he did a lot of work and research on that, and a lot of the kind of the findings that he kind of was first to back in the 70s has been borne out now through all kinds of like fMRIs, like real science in a way
Mhm.
now has kind of borne out a lot of his findings in concentration. And so I think one of the things I learned for sure was that you can't just look at traditional personality variables in establishing the ability of someone to do well or not do well under pressure. That you have to look at a lot of other kinds of things, not just the context of the performance, but how the person pays attention and what happens to their concentration under pressure. So, although there's lots of amazing things that I learned from him because he was just like profoundly good at getting like straight to the issue. That was what he was really good at. I think, is most influential around this kind of the impact of concentration and attention.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So, what is the winning mind and what inspired you to create it?
So I spent a number of years with Robert Nidifer at Enhanced Performance Systems and really learned the craft, the art of helping people and organizations improve and manage pressure effectively. And the natural evolution of that was as that company was focused more on the assessment of individuals. So there was a lot of work that we did with personality assessment. I'm not sure how familiar you and your audience is with that, but that was kind of the thrust of that organization. And my primary interest was like hands-on applied work with groups. And so we formed a partnership with Enhanced Performance Systems where we were leveraging the expertise of the kind of the assessment side of the game, and we were really pursuing kind of hands-on consulting work. And so that was why Winning Mind was born. And the idea was really to help relatively high-level performers in sport, business, and military kind of achieve even higher levels of performance, even though they're starting at, reasonably strong levels. Our goal was to get them from, I guess you could say, good to great in a way. And that was really the impetus for Winning Mind.
Yeah. So, I've taken a personality assessment. I'm not sure. For those who are unfamiliar, can you share what it is and kind of the goal
Sure.
and mission behind it?
Sure. Which one did you take?
I don't know. I think it was, I don't know which one it was.
Okay. Well, like
The
the
main
the
one.
really the one that a lot of people are familiar with is called Myers-Briggs.
Okay.
Uh, and you get like a four-letter acronym that kind of puts you in a certain personality type. But the idea of personality assessments generally is usually it's a series of questions that leads you to a certain type of conclusion around somebody's personality. So there are a whole bunch of these that are out there in the marketplace. There's a lot of research to show that regardless of the flavor of the assessment, it tends to boil down into like distinct characteristics without getting too technical. But the idea is that by learning more about an individual, you can make some predictions about how they're going to perform in various situations. And you can also help identify kind of goodness of fit between that individual and like other individuals. So let's imagine you're putting a team together. Sometimes it's quite useful to say, okay, well, we've got, a couple people that are, super extroverted and controlling and dominant. So we need some people that are more likely to be good followers. Anyway, you can kind of put together a good, diverse, well-functioning group through the identification of different personality types.
Yeah, so I took it a few years ago, and what they told me is that for each individual, your personality will change kind of every however many years. Is that true?
I think for sure people are always kind of learning and growing and developing and changing. If they weren't, then, I wouldn't be in a particularly good job, right? Because people would be stuck. On the other hand, I think that there are core personality features or traits that are relatively stable
Yeah.
over time, and they don't really adjust that much. It's really our ability to understand and navigate and kind of compensate for those kinds of characteristics. That's kind of my core belief with that. So I would say I don't want to put numbers on it, but I think we're majority kind of nature and trait, and then on top of that might be 25% of our ability to kind of modify and modulate and change who we are.
Right, because we're always learning.
Yeah.
So you've worked with everyone from Olympic athletes to major organizations. What's the biggest similarity you've seen between those pro athletes and successful executives?
Well, first of all, it's a great question, and it's one a lot of people are interested in. And the reality is, people are people, so we're all kind of battling the same demons, regardless of like what the environment is. So the reality is, the problem set isn't really different in these different groups. But when you look at what are the characteristics of the highest performers in different arenas, there are some subtle differences, right? I mean, obviously, if you're going to be a great athlete, you've got to have some physical talent.
Mhm.
Not necessarily the case in leadership and, in being successful as a corporate citizen. Um, but the similarities are really that you have to navigate pressure well. You've got to be able to, um, oftentimes in a team sport, certainly be able to lead people effectively. You've got to be able to manage your own emotions, right? You've got to be able to learn and develop and take cues in from the system. And I guess there are other things that we could get into, but I think those are the core, those are the core assets that I see that are similarities between high performers.
Yeah. How do you personally define mental resilience, and has that definition evolved for you over time?
A good question. Um, it for sure has evolved, I think, as I've thought about things. Um, I think early in my career, I tended to be a little bit more like outcome focused. Like the idea was that like someone who was mentally tough was somebody that would be able to basically perform under pressure, that you could like deliver the goods when the proverbial bullets are flying. And now I've moved into the idea that it's a bit more about, this is going to sound really cheesy, but it's kind of like doing your best when things are difficult. So it's moved from a very strong outcome orientation to, are you controlling the things that you have control over? For example, your effort and your attitude. This is a kind of a familiar refrain, in the psychology literature,
Yeah.
I think. But it's one thing to understand that idea, and it's another thing to really believe it, right? Because the world is very outcome focused. Like the world really doesn't give a crap if your effort is high, if your performance sucks. Like, that's all the world sees is that your performance sucks. But I have really tried very hard to embrace the idea that it's about effort and attitude when things are difficult and the ability to kind of put those things aside and still behave and act in a way that is most effective for the situation and most in alignment with your values.
Right. So when someone is under a lot of pressure, what's the first thing you teach them to focus on?
Well, obviously, it depends a little bit on the situation, right? Because different people have different aptitudes and openness to different ideas for how to help them. So I'm a big believer that you have to meet people where they are. Like you really have to understand, the urgency of the situation, the capacity of the person, all those kinds of things. So that would be the big caveat. Um, Is it okay if I give you kind of a continuum of things, like a range of things that might depend? So listen, I think what you'll hear from most people who do what I do is that they will talk about some type of mental reframing or some type of centering exercise. Like the first thing to do is to calm yourself down so that you can create an environment for your brain so that you can respond effectively, right? Because when our brain gets hijacked, when we get stressed, we're not in a great position to really respond effectively. So that's always in my mind is like, can I help the person very quickly, whatever the mechanism is, breathing or what have you, get them to kind of center and calm themselves down. So that's like the simplest side of things.
Yeah.
On the other side of the continuum, which is the space that I'm much more interested in, is I concern myself less with making them feel more comfortable, which is kind of what everybody wants.
Yeah.
And I concern myself with helping them connect with the reason that they're doing what they're doing and to try to overpower the anxiety or what have you, the obstacle with purpose. Does that make sense? So one is like actually controlling physiology. The other is amplifying purpose.
Mhm.
And I'm a little bit more interested in the latter than the former.
Right. Can Going back to the mental toughness, can mental toughness be taught to everyone, or are there some traits a person needs to already have?
I think it can be trained in everybody, but I don't think that all people's capacity is the same.
Right.
So I think everybody can kind of learn and understand and make progress, but I don't think we're necessarily all created equal in the way that we kind of our brains and bodies navigate pressure and stress.
Yeah, so when you're under that pressure and stress, sometimes you can make mistakes, or if you're playing a sport, there's gonna be losses sometimes. So what role does failure and loss play in athlete development?
Um, it's everything, actually. I think the ability to create a meaningful relationship with failure is super important because it's such a big part of sports and a big part of life. And it's a big part of the work that I do is helping people, sounds a little cheesy, but like create a relationship, better relationship with failure as opposed to it becoming something that is seen in a really negative light or to have shame around. It really should be something that is seen as part of the process of improvement and getting better. So it's really important.
And specifically, how do you help others build that relationship with loss?
Well, I think it starts with some storytelling and some education about um, how even kind of the greatest of us have overcome or dealt with failure. So I think that's useful, right? I mean, there's all these great stories. I don't know if you um, are old enough to remember or know about like the Michael Jordan commercial, the Nike one. Do you know
Mhm.
about this one where he's like, I've missed whatever number of baskets and, had this many failures and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, but that's kind of made him who he is. So I think that's a pretty powerful narrative. So I think the first thing is just kind of opening the mind to the idea that failure can actually be important, if not good. So that's kind of the first thing. And then I think you have to let the athlete or the individual like really practice that and kind of work through specific failures so that they're able to zoom out and see how problems have actually contributed to, positive aspects of performance. If you want, I can bore you to tears with a theory that I have that is a kind of profoundly important part of the work that I do. You want to talk
Yeah,
about
I'm
that at all or
curious.
no?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, so this is something I've been thinking about now for a couple of years, and it was born out of the following idea, which is a little bit morose. But have you heard of memento mori? Do you know the idea of memento mori?
No, I haven't heard of it.
Wait, I'm going to show you something here. Sorry. So you see this chart here?
Yes.
Okay. So this is a Stoic um, practice called memento mori, and it is Latin for remember that you're going to die. Okay. So that's what memento mori means. And each of the squares in there represents a week of my life. And basically, I track the weeks of my life. It's like 52 across and 80 something down. And it kind of it reminds you of a couple of things. One is that like we're only on Earth for a limited amount of time. It reminds us to make maximal use of the time that we have, right? Um, but it also got me thinking about like why are we designed to go away? Like why are humans designed to die? Do you have any ideas or any thoughts on that? We thought about this?
I think it kind of goes back to purpose for me. Like we each have our own purpose on Earth, and I mean, kind of going to the failure and loss, like we're going to have those. Life is not perfect. Life is not something we're destined to continue living for, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
I think that's great. Yeah. I think like the idea that we're limited is a motivational force for us, right? And I think it helps drive purpose. I think if we were around for forever, I mean, I wonder what that might do to motivation.
Yeah.
Um, but back to the idea, which is it had me thinking like, okay, so we have this life force, and then we have like death. We go away. So like back to the question of like, well, why would we be designed that way? And some of the answers that we've touched on. And then I started to think about, well, if you look around us, there are these oppositional forces everywhere. right? I mean, there's what? Light and darkness, right? Day and night. The tides come in, the tides come out. There's good, there's bad. There is, I mean, our bodies are designed to have kind of oppositional systems in place, right? We have the parasympathetic and the sympathetic systems. So there are systems that are designed to rev us up, to excite us, to motivate us to action, fight or flight. And then we have systems what? To calm us down and relax us. And there's this constant like yin and yang. And if you look out into the world, it's everywhere. Trust me. Once you start to think about this, you'll see it's everywhere. And the question is like, well, why? Like, why would there be these poles? And it occurred to me that it's possible that this is kind of the engine of the universe. This is like that the universe is designed. The universe goes out, the universe comes in. And that this is part of what creates a cycle, an evolution, a progression of things. So then the question is, all right, so who the hell cares? But in my world, think about the idea of success and think about its corollary, which is failure. Okay. So why would those two things be in existence in the same way? And I think once you learn that those two things have an equal place, you start to understand that, like, oh, well, that's just the way things work. And there is a reason for it, which I think is kind of a profound insight, as opposed to like, oh, well, good is good and bad is always bad. I don't think that's true. I think both things are necessary. Friction in the universe is necessary for there to be growth. And that is a fundamental premise of how I now try to help people is to kind of to use that idea to help.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Because failure and success, they do correlate with each other.
Yeah, you can't have, I mean, you can't have one without the other.
Yeah, and that makes sense for why we're not gonna continue living forever.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so what are the most important things to consider when creating a successful and cohesive team, whether it's in sports or business?
So like the number one and the number two and probably the number three answer is trust. But it's kind of a boring answer because it's kind of the answer I think most people will give, but it's a boring answer for a reason because I think it's right. I think if you don't start with a foundation of trust, you're gonna have problems at some point and usually pretty quickly. Um, but I think when you move beyond trust and some of the connected principles to that, like effective communication and the ability to disagree and have good conflict and things like that. And by the way, I don't know, have you read Patrick Lencioni's Five Dysfunctions of a Team? Have you come across that?
No.
Yeah, for you or your readers, it's like if you want a really good, like quick introduction to what it means, like what you need to build an effective team, that's a great place to start. But when you move past some of these kind of more basic principles, for me, the thing to look at is purpose. And like Simon Sinek's work on what is your why, what the big reason is that allows for there to be alignment of folks, I think is maybe the second most powerful component. So when I try to work with teams or educate folks, I distill things into two core foundational pillars. One is chemistry, right? So how does the team get along? What's the trust and the ability for the team to disagree effectively? And then identity, which is what is the purpose, the why, the reason that that team exists, and what is success? I think when those two things come together, you have the platform for a really successful group of people.
Yeah, so when you're working with a team or just individually, what strategies or tools do you help your clients kind of stay on track and actually meet their purpose or meet their goals?
So, I mean, the first thing I will almost always do is start with some educational and foundational principles so that everybody kind of understands is on the same page.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I will say is that there's lots of ways to win. Like I really believe this, that there are lots of ways to be successful. And the magic happens when you figure out what your way is. And if you look out into the world today, in terms of the different kinds of personalities we have, the different kinds of leaders that we have, like regardless of your like political viewpoints, think about the range of individuals we have who have managed to be successful, like successful in our world, having gained power or influence or whatever. Like it's a pretty crazy range. Like we've got everything from, the Martin Luther Kings of the world or whatever to pick your, despot on the other side of the equation. It's a pretty big range.
Yeah.
And I think that the most important thing is that you're surrounded by people that basically line up behind that idea. That's really the secret sauce. And so like the first thing is the kind of education understanding. Then we move into the practical pieces of like, all right, well, how do we build trust? Like, what are the mechanics and mechanisms that allow you to build trust? So, there are exercises to create a level of vulnerability with people, to share different personality insights using assessments. Sometimes those can be quite effective in helping people get to know each other. And then there are exercises to help people practice how to engage in difficult conversations, how to navigate failure. So those are all kind of on the chemistry side of things. And then there are also mechanisms, exercises, practices that help groups solidify their identity. So, what is your reason for doing what you do? What does success look like? And I have a whole kind of process for taking groups through the fortification of their identity.
Nice. So you helped design AME, Athletes Mental Edge, the first web-based sport psychological training
Mhm.
platform.
Yep.
What was the biggest challenge in bringing in mental training into kind of the digital world?
So you have to go way back, right? I mean, the world has changed like so incredibly from a technology standpoint. So this was kind of back in the day where we were still leveraging pretty simplistic web-based tools. Um, so the challenges, I mean, there were all kinds of challenges, but basically the first challenge was could we create a system that would interpret the the scores on the profile in such a way that it could dynamically pull different pieces of information into a report. So depending on what your scores were, like could it in an intelligent way grab hold of various narratives that would then come together in a report that would be useful for an end user? Could it draw conclusions? So it was really like the training of it was pretty complicated because all that we had to do kind of manually.
Yeah.
So that was really the big challenge behind AIM. The secondary challenge was, you know, ideal in a world where the information is kind of sensitive sometimes. I mean, it can get quite personal, and so there are all kinds of ethical considerations about, you know, how and where you give feedback. Can a report without a professional interface, meaning a person,
Mhm.
is that a good way to do it? Or does there need to be other kinds of supports in place? So there were kind of some surrounding challenges.
Yeah, and you already said it's continuously evolving with technology and all of that. How do you see specifically the future of mental performance training using technology growing over the next few years?
Well, how much do you use AI these days? Are you kind of into it or opposed to it, or what's your relationship with it?
Um, it's I'm kind of in between. I've definitely tested it out. I continue to test it out. But it's not always reliable. So
No, it still has for sure. It still has some problems and
yeah.
hallucinations. But um, I've become very interested in this. In fact, like for the last couple weeks, I've been putting together what we call like Winning Mind AI,
Mhm.
which is kind of our attempt to experiment with how far we can get an AI trained model to act as a virtual sports psychologist.
Interesting.
And it's still a work in progress, but I have to say, like, it's pretty crazy what you can do in
Yeah.
terms of the training of these models. I hope it never replaces real people, but I also think that the ability to provide a much higher baseline level of advice and guidance to a much wider audience is going to be possible with these tools. And the big problem I personally have struggled with is like, how can I be useful to more people rather than less people? Not in an arrogant way, but I would like love to be able to be one to many. And
Yeah.
the traditional way is, well, you write a book or you go on a podcast. These are great ways, or you give lectures.
Mhm.
But those aren't necessarily customized. Like we can give general information here, but if Kathy, the decathlon, is watching this and she has a specific problem
Yeah.
with recovering from an injury, she needs somebody that can talk to her in a more personal level. And I think that what we're going to find is technology is going to allow us to get much more personalized instruction. It's going to happen in medicine, it's already happening in therapy, and it's going to happen in applied sports psychology.
Yeah, that's good to have more of that accessibility.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So, how do you adapt your coaching style when working with different types of performers, whether it's athletes, executives, or the military?
Well, I think the first thing is um, it's difficult to effectively adapt if
Mhm.
you don't understand the language of the performance environment. I mean, that's a real limitation, right? So, just to give you an example, like let's just say I was asked to do some work with a group of gymnasts.
Mhm.
Okay, my knowledge and like my vernacular with the gymnastics work, it's just limited. So I'm gonna get sussed out pretty quickly. Like as soon as you start using the wrong language, you're kind of, in
Yeah.
a diminished state. So what I would say is you probably can't do a great job if you don't really understand the environment that you're talking in. You can apply good principles, but I think when you're working at a really high level, I have come to believe that it's difficult if you don't have subject matter expertise. Okay? That's the first thing. Now, as it relates to adapting to an individual themselves, I think that there are things that we all do all the time. Like when we mirror, right? We kind of pick up on cues. Like, does this person talk slowly? Do they use, complex language? Are they distracted? Are they interested in philosophical things, or do they shut off? Like, these are all cues that we have to take in and use to adjust the way that we communicate with folks. And so hopefully that's part of what I'm doing. And I think that there are, not to stereotype, but like there are kind of archetypal, kinds of people in these different environments, right? I mean, the odds that you're going to meet somebody who's, a Navy SEAL who's, like kind of loose with the facts and not very thoughtful about things, is low, right? So that's a very high performance culture. And so you need to take a kind of high performance, no nonsense, direct kind of an attitude. That's not going to fly that well potentially with, I don't know, I don't want to be negative about another environment, but if you've got a person who's maybe not used to engaging quite so directly, you got to be more careful.
Yeah, everybody's different.
Everybody's different.
So, what is your mental playbook that keeps you going through your work and just life?
So I would say that the number one thing that, excuse me, that helps me is keeping the performance objective secondary.
Mm.
Hold on, I'm going to drink some water.
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. So, um, kind of back to the beginning of our conversation where, like, when you get overly concerned about the outcome, it affects the performance. And so for me, the North Star is, am I prepared? Right? Have I put in the work? Am I showing up with the intent to be helpful? Right, right. Is the effort there?
Yeah.
Um, and I guess it's in a similar way, have I tried to be helpful? And so I'm much more about process, and trying to do the right things rather than getting caught up in like, how did I do? That's really hard, but that's my mental playbook.
Yeah, I like that. Looking back on your own athletic career, what mental skill or lessons do you still use in your daily life?
Well, I would say one that is evolving and a piece of um, coaching that I give a lot of my clients is to try to separate how you feel from what you do or how you behave. It's kind of a
Mhm.
weird idea, right? Because like most of the time our behavior follows from how we're feeling. If we're in a bad mood,
Yeah,
we might be short-tempered. Um, if we are feeling shy or not confident, we might not want to be social, right? Um, a common situation in sport, we'll take a soccer player, for example, is that when confidence is low, they're less likely to ask for the ball, right? They're kind of shrink a little bit. And so what I try to do for myself and what I try to help guide others in is that you can separate those things out. Like just because you feel a certain way doesn't mean you have to behave in accordance with
yeah,
that. And so that gives people permission to kind of feel not great, but still perform great, or at least try to perform great. And I think it can be a really big unlock for folks. And it also helps, I don't know, undermine this idea of I have to feel great. Because that's what we all want, of course. Like I want to feel confident. I want to feel happy. I want to feel strong. I want to feel energized. I want to feel motivated. Like all the, and so I'm trying to find ways to do all those things, which is fine. But you know what? You don't have to have all those things in place to perform great.
right.
You know, so that's
That's
maybe
so
part of
interesting.
my point.
I played JV soccer myself, and
Okay,
I wasn't, the best at it, and so I can really see how my kind of feelings and emotions affected how I interacted with my team. And when I wasn't feeling confident, I was really tired. I didn't want to engage and
of
kind of,
course.
go for the ball and whatever. So that's really
Absolutely.
interesting to notice that for me personally.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. What else you got?
Sorry, what?
What else you got?
Oh, yes. So, what advice would you give to young athletes or even just young professionals who want to build resilience early on in their careers?
Um, I think a really good starting point is to connect with what you're really good at. Like to make sure that you are thinking about either the thing that you really are great at already or the thing that you are interested in becoming great at in the future. I think the stronger you're connected with what makes you a good athlete or what your advantage is, I think the better that is. And it's a very positive, kind of exciting superhero, superpower way of approaching things that you can do even with young athletes because sometimes some of the conceptual stuff is hard.
Right.
And I think a lot of athletes, they don't love like, all right, I'm going to teach you how to do breathing or meditation or thought stopping or visualization. Like those are all tools that are okay. But like kids love it when like, hey man, like what's your superpower? Like I'm a crazy dribbler or I have a super powerful shot or my awareness is crazy. I see what's going on around me. That's a nice place to start, I think.
Yeah, I love that. So, what's a personal or professional goal you're really excited about right now?
Personal, professional goal. Um, I think generally speaking, I am very interested in continuing to kind of evolve systems and theories that I think will be helpful to people that maybe are just a little bit different than what exists out there in the marketplace right now.
Yeah,
That's the thing that really excites me is how to combine what I would say is the best of like philosophical and psychological and performance knowledge way from the past. I mean, you name it, like Aristotle and um, Stoic principles. Like I like grabbing hold of all that stuff and modernizing and putting it into a space that kind of people today can grab hold of. So that really excites me. And frankly, I've used AI as a really cool thought partner for a lot of this stuff and found it to be very useful. So that's been pretty motivating.
yeah, awesome. My last question for you is what matters most to you, the destination, the journey, or the company?
Hmm. You know, it's really hard to answer because like my gut would be when you started the question, I was like, oh, well, it's definitely the journey.
Mhm.
Um, but the journey without the company, and I'm assuming by company you mean the people, or do you mean, yeah, okay. Um, I think it's kind of a combination of those two things, that it's kind of where you're going and who you're going with,
Mhm.
that maybe is most meaningful.
Oh, awesome. Well, thank you so much, Mark, for joining me on the Mental Playbook podcast. To my listeners, mind strong, game on.
Awesome. Thank you.